Please pray with me. Gracious God, thank you for our children. Thank you for their questions. Thank you for their endless observations about life and this life that you have given us. God, we ask that your blessing would be upon them. Let your blessing would be upon us, and your Holy Spirit would empower us to continue to teach them and to listen to them teaching us. We ask this in your name. And everybody said, Amen. Amen. So, I'm going to preach from here because we have visuals. And I've got more visuals that I'm going to hand out in a minute. Father Ed will be very, very happy. So, this is Caesarea Philippi. This is the location of our gospel lesson this morning. Or at least this is all that sort of remains of what Caesarea Philippi was. Caesarea Philippi is actually now located in an area sort of between Israel and Syria. Some people would say it's a disputed territory. Other people would say, no, it belongs to this country or that country. But it is in an area called the Golan Heights, which is about 30 miles north of the Galilee region. And the Galilee region is the area where Jesus spent most of his ministry time. So think about that. 30 miles away. They walked. They didn't Uber, right? They walked 30 miles to get to this spot. Hint number one, that maybe this location was important enough that Jesus said, we got to go there so we can talk about that thing that we got to talk about. All right? So according to our gospel lesson, Jesus takes them here. All right? In order to ask them the question, who do the people say that I am? But before we dive into that, we got to look at this photo, all right? So you can see over on the left here, there's a huge sort of opening in a cave, all right? And then there are several moving to the right. You can see a couple of them, a couple of niches that are like carved into the rock, all right? And we're going to see some close-up views in just a second, because there are actually 6 different niches that are carved into this rock, not including the big, huge cave on the left. So here we are. So there's the big, huge one, sort of a close-up, and it's mammoth. It's really, really large. Here's 2 other of the niches, and that's Father Ralph standing there gazing on, sort of gives you a scale of how big that one is. And then there's another niche up above that. And then, if you move further to the right, there are actually 4 more. So here's 1, 2, 3, and another 4 right there. All right? What are these things? Why are they there? Why would Jesus bring us all the way up here to see this? The largest cave there, the one on the far left, is all that's left from what was the Temple of Pan, right? Was the Greek god and sort of the protector of wildlife, right? He had the shape of a man on top and then the legs of a goat down on the bottom. So I'm going to need someone to be Pan. And I have a goat. So you can just hold on to this for a while. Who wants to be? Come on. Okay, here we go. All right, you can hold on to the goat. All right. So now, all these other niches are to other gods that were worshipped in that area. All right. So you have all these other gods. So we've got the god Dionysus, who is the god of pleasure. Okay. So here, Wayne, you get to put that around your neck. All right. So all right. So. We've got the god Artemis or Artemis, who is the god of wine. So, oh no, you're not 21. You can hold that. All right. So we have the god of Athena, who is the god of wisdom. So we have a copy of the scriptures. We're going to send right over there. Hold on to that for me. All right. Minerva, the god of art. All right. Weston, you're going to hold on to that for me. All right. Don't lose it. And then you've got Diana, the god of architecture. So, of course, a 3D puzzle building of whatever that is, the Sears Tower, I think, or the Willis Tower. All right? Then you've got Orpheus, who is the god of music. Mary B. It's got to be you, right? Sorry. You get a tambourine, and then I got a kazoo. I put my mouth on that, so be careful. All right? And then I've got one more goat, and I'm not going to hand him out because he's a little dangerous, because there was actually a temple to the sacred dancing goats. Which, let's be honest, if a goat starts to dance, they're all sacred, right? You know, I mean, come on now. All right, so I'll put him right here. He can just hang out. So you've got all these gods, Gods of wine, god of food, god of art, dancing. And so what you did is if you wanted to honor one of these gods, you would get a bunch of friends together and you'd have a banquet. And then as the leader of the banquet, you would choose an animal to sacrifice, and you would go down to the large temple on the far left here, and you would sacrifice the animal. Why? Why would you do this? All right? Because you had to appease the gods. Because these gods, apparently, were angry. And you need to do that thing that's going to make them happy so that then they will dispense the thing that they're in charge of. Oh, well done. You've sacrificed properly. You get some pleasure, or you get some art. But if you don't do it well, no wine for you, all right? I'm going to withhold the blessing because you've not pleased me. No wisdom for you over here. Don't even get me started on what the dancing goats would withheld. So all of these things were worshipped here at this place, Caesarea Philippi. So back to our text. Jesus brings his friends, his followers, to this place and asks them, who do the people say that the Son of Man is? I mean, he's basically asking them, what have you heard over these last 3 years that we've been together? What have you heard the people saying and talking about? And like a typical group of young people, and yes, they were young, these were not old or even middle-aged men, their answers are all over the map. They're like, some say you're Elijah, maybe John the Baptist, or Jeremiah, or one of the other prophets. It's a great line in the text. You can just sort of roll right over it. It's like they were just sort of trying to like shotgun answers, and if one of them was correct, they'd be able to go, nailed it. We got that one, Jesus. What's the next question? But I don't actually think that's what was happening. Let's take a look at each of their responses. Why would some people think that Jesus was Elijah? Well, if you look at the very last book of the Old Testament, and the very last or second to last verse in that book, it's the book of Malachi. It's not pronounced Malachi, it's Malachi, all right? And Malachi tells the people that God is saying that before the arrival of the day, capital T, capital D, God is going to send Elijah back to them. So what is the day? What is that? The day is when God sets everything right, right? It is thy kingdom come here on earth. It's the age to come when God will make all things new. There will be this new creation. Some people refer to it as Judgment Day, but that gives us sort of like a view that it's like this big imposing doom. No. That's not what the day is. The day is a good thing when God sets everything right. The shalom of God comes to rest on earth, and God is with the people, right? That is the day. So in order for that day to come, the Hebrew people know that Elijah has to come before that because that's what God has said. So therefore, Jesus is doing all these new things. Maybe he's Elijah, right? So why would they then think he might be John the Baptist? Why would people assume that Jesus might be his own cousin? Because they were cousins, right? John and Elijah were very closely tied together. A lot of people saw in John the Baptist the spirit of Elijah preparing the way for Elijah. Jesus himself says so in Matthew 11. He says, this man has the spirit of Elijah within him. So if Elijah was coming, then Jesus might be John the Baptist preparing the way for Elijah. If Jesus wasn't Elijah, well, maybe he's the guy that's preparing the way for Elijah. All right, and then finally, why would they assume that he might be Jeremiah? Well, in Jeremiah 31, there's this prophecy that says that God is going to be making a new covenant with the people. But it's not going to be one of those covenants where it was like with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, which was like an external covenant. This covenant will be written on the hearts of all people. It's not just for these folks over here. God's making a covenant with everyone. And Jesus has had some things to say about what goes on inside our hearts, has he not? Just 2 weeks ago, we heard about Jesus talking. It's not what comes into you that defiles you. It's the stuff that comes out of you that's already there. That's what makes you unclean and impure, right? But Jesus doesn't really address any of that. He does the Jesus thing and switches the conversation around on them. And he turns to them and he says, okay, well, what about you? Who do you say that I am? This is where Jesus gets personal. He wants to know where their personal commitment to God is. And of course, it's Peter who comes sort of racing to the front of the line. And just 2 chapters earlier, he was the one that got out of the boat and walked on the water, so he's feeling confident he's got this. And he's like, well, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Now hear those words again in context of where we are. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Where are we? We're in a place where all these other gods are worshiped. Are these gods alive? No, they're dead. All right? In the Syriac Aramaic language, which would have been Jesus' own language, those words that Peter says are actually can be translated, "You are the Son of God who gives life." Now, those of you with items, hold them up. Do any of these things give life? No. Right? Are any of these things alive? No. Like the living God, this Jesus, gives life and gives it abundantly, freely. You don't have to go kill a dancing goat and then God will bless you. Jesus says, no, I give this life freely, abundantly. So hopefully you're starting to see that where Jesus does his teaching should probably never be separated from what Jesus is teaching. So the narrative moves on, and Jesus responds to Peter as a rabbi. And he says, blessed are you, Peter, son of Jonah. Like, you didn't come up with this on your own. God's Spirit is clearly working within you. A+, Peter. Well done. Right? And Peter then goes on to tell him, he says, you are the rock. And these words, you are the rock, literally mean nothing may overcome. Nothing may overcome. We struggle with those words in the church. We don't really believe them a lot because a lot of times, and myself included, we sort of feel like the church is under attack or in trouble. And maybe that's true, but nothing is going to overcome it. So don't be afraid. Jesus has said nothing is going to overcome this. And upon this rock, which cannot be overcome, Jesus says, I will build my church. Notice the very obvious lack of denomination that Jesus mentions, or lack of denomination, or version of church, right? Doesn't sort of point out a particular stream that he's referring to. He just says, my church. This is the first time that Jesus uses the word church in the scriptures. It's the Greek word ekklesia. In his language, it would have been the word kenoshit. And the words of Jesus are very clear. I will build my church. We are not called to make this our church. We probably shouldn't refer to this place as our church. St. Thomas is not yours. It's not mine. It's Jesus' church. Now, our gospel reading ends there, but I'm going to wet your whistle just a little bit about what's to come next week, because it fits in again with where we are. Jesus is recognized by Peter and the disciples as the Messiah, but it's kind of clear that they still have their own version of Messiah stuck in their head. They are very, very happy knowing what they know and feeling what they feel, and it doesn't really mesh with Jesus' version. Because Jesus then goes on to tell them that the Messiah has to suffer and die. This really flies in the face with the understanding of what they would have known Messiah to be. The Messiah had to be 3 things: Son of David, the Almighty, and eternal. But now Jesus says that the Messiah is going to suffer. If you suffer, how can you be almighty? That doesn't work. And the Messiah is going to die? How can you be eternal if you're dead? That's really, really a hard thing to get around. So Peter comes racing back to the front of the line. He just got an A+, and now he's headed for an epic fail, right? But let's give Peter credit for a moment, because he does the proper thing. He takes his teacher aside, right? The text says it right there. He takes them aside, which is the proper thing to do, because you would never, ever, ever disagree with a teacher in front of the other students. We could maybe take a lesson from that. That would be a shameful act in that culture. But then Peter gets it all wrong. He doesn't ask Jesus a question, he rebukes him, which is a big no-no, all right? Questions would have been fine. You were supposed to ask your rabbi questions. How else would you learn, right? Questions were expected, encouraged even. But here comes Peter rebuking Jesus, saying, no. Your version of Messiah is all wrong, Jesus. And of course, Jesus reminds Peter whose church this is. And Jesus says one of the most maybe harshest things that he ever says, "Get behind me, Satan." Consider that in light of what we've already talked about. The Satan is anti the Christ, the Messiah. Jesus is calling Peter out because his version of Jesus, of the church, is not from God. Peter thought he had it all figured out, right? Because I understand this whole God, Jesus, Bible, church thing. We got it. I know what the scriptures say. I mean, so many of us, myself included, I think we kind of figure we have it all figured out. God, Jesus, Bible, church, we got it. But let's be honest. We're all heretics. None of us get it 100% right. The moment any of us think that we are standing firmly, I know exactly what this means. No, we don't. We probably have some good ideas, but none of us are getting 100% when it comes to our understanding of God. God's ways are not our ways. Our thoughts are not God's thoughts. None of us are getting it 100% correct, which means we're all heretics. Myself included. That comes as no shock to maybe some of you, right? Even though Peter correctly identifies Jesus as the Messiah, he can't accept what Jesus' own version of Messiah is. So that begs the following question. Do we have versions of Jesus that aren't exactly who Jesus is? Do we have our own versions and understandings of Jesus and Messiah? My friend and teacher who lives in Nazareth, his name is Father Kamal Farah, he was doing a teaching here in this place with bishops from all over the world in several different denominations. And he stood here in this place and talked about how Jesus said, "It is my church." And that no version of Christianity gets it 100% right. He told them, he says, this is his church. It's not my church, and it is not your church. Bishops hearing this, all right? What an amazing setting. May we, the people of St. Thomas, be the kind of Jesus followers who allow Jesus to be in charge of his church. Amen.